Welcome everyone to our fourth episode of our conversation around LGBTQ people, in particular around campaigns focused on health and well-being. And today, one of the conversations that we're going to have is with Zori Paul. Zori, thank you for being on the call today. I wanted to give a little bit of background on you and your bio, because I think what's really cool about what you do is that you're focused on the intersection of marginalized identities and specifically bisexual women of color as well as cross-cultural relationships. You're also a therapist, and you specifically help people understand the relationships in professional development. And I think that's important, especially given the work that we do today. So you're also with Thoughts Out Loud Counseling,
Yes.
and you're the co-founder of Black in Mental Health, which I think is awesome. And I just really wanted to say thank you for being here today, and wanted to give you just a shout out for all the great work that you're doing. And again, allow you to speak a little bit about the work that you do and why it's really, really important to you.
Happy to be here today. I think you covered everything. So I'm a doctoral candidate at University of Missouri St. Louis. I'm also a clinical mental health counselor at Thoughts Out Loud Counseling, as you also just said. And I'm also a co-founder of Black in Mental Health, and we just got finished with our Black in Mental Health Week, which was awesome. And we're really looking forward to already planning next year's event. So for those of you who don't know, Black Mental Health is an online initiative that focuses on promoting and highlighting Black mental health researchers, educators, students, and advocates around the world, so that there's really no excuse to say that you don't know any Black mental health professionals. And yes, also a lot of my research focuses on bisexual plus women of color. That's currently what I'm doing my dissertation on, bisexual plus women of color and identity affirmation. And I also do a lot of research around mentorship, that professional development aspect. So that's really important to me because I think everyone needs a mentor, no matter whether you're in academia or some other area. I think mentors can be really helpful in anyone's professional development. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and I guess one of the questions I have, because one of the things the LGBTQ Institute is trying to continue to do is to connect academics and activists. But in regards to the academic side, some of the folks, and to your point, that are most, you know, disproportionately targeted for harassment, discrimination, Black women, but also bisexual folks who happen to have the least amount of data around their life experiences. So as someone who's specializing in that group of folks and trying to highlight and elevate their stories, what are some of the research that you look at in particular to understand what is happening, and what can we do to help folks who are experiencing this kind of marginalization, and being under-resourced? How do we make sure that those who are least heard from are heard? And then what research do you use to inform some of the conversations you're having with these communities?
yeah. So I guess I'll start with research that I've seen and then expand out.
Yeah.
For bisexual plus people in general, I would like to say that within the last decade or so, there's been an increase in research, which is good. But a lot of the research, or at least a lot of the research that I've been seeing, either still focuses on the negatives, negative mental health factors impacting this population, which is important. Don't get me wrong, it's important. But as someone who's not only a researcher, but also a counselor who wants to implement my research and my work with my clients, it's also okay, great. I know that these are risk factors of this population, but what can I do as a mental health professional? What can other mental health professionals do when they have a client who identifies as bisexual. And so there's starting to become an increase in research that looks at more affirming, identity
Mm,
affirming research for bisexual plus people, but it's still really small in an already small, I guess you can say, like, group of research already on bisexual plus people. And then when you add in the intersecting identity of being a person of color, and then also the intersecting identity of being a woman, it gets really small as well. So essentially there's a lot of room to grow, but I'm really hopeful about this research area growing and becoming bigger, and people learning more about bisexuality and not so much about the myths of bisexuality, such as like people being promiscuous, or meaning, or people thinking that bisexuality means that you're transphobic. That's not the case. And then in terms of research in general, I think it's important to really work with the community that we're looking at, and also to make sure that the people who are doing the research have some sort of connection to the community. So the whole idea of like me search, basically.
mhm,
I think that's really important, but oftentimes some of those people, maybe don't have connection to resources or an institutional review board. So, when you mentioned advocates and
mhm,
researchers coming together, that's like my first thing of like, okay, how can what I do with my work partner up with other people who may have those experiences. For this particular research in general, this is definitely me search, but there's other areas of the LGBTQ plus research that I'm interested in doing, but I think it's super important that as I do that, to also like bring up other people.
mm,
And I guess that's kind of where that mentor aspect comes into it, especially in regards to research, and like help them be able to do it themselves, and also to get more voices, so that it's not just predominantly just like white cisgender males that we're looking at as participants. Um, I feel like I kind of lost my train of thought, but
No,
yeah, that's all.
I think you, well, I mean, you touched upon so many good pieces of information. I think that viewers who are watching this would like to explore a little bit more. Like, so for example, making sure that when we have academics, that they're also involving the community in real tangible ways. And I think that is something I'd love to have you explore a little bit more in terms of how, what have you seen researchers that you've really admired, how have they engaged with the community in real ways, to where when you get to a point where you're releasing data, that community takes up that data and uses that in organizing, for example? Are there examples that you've seen?
Yeah, so I think there's different things that you can do at different stages of research. So obviously at the very beginning, creating relationships, even before you start the research, creating research relationships with those communities, like actual intentional, not just I'm trying to get something out of you type of relationships. Having them be part of your thought process, especially when you're creating measures for studies. So I've seen some researchers say, we had a group of bisexual identified people come in and, you know, give us some ideas for our measure. And then we went back to them and we're
Hmm,
like, hey, does this make sense? Is this tangible? Does this answer the questions that you brought up
right.
initially? And then, like I said before, actually having people from the community be on the research team,
Mhm.
be active participants of the research. And then I've also seen people, because another thing that comes up, I feel a lot in any research dealing with marginalized groups, is okay, you collected the data, you took the data and you supposedly did something with the data, but
Right.
we don't see the data.
Right.
So I've seen a lot of people do various things with research data. So there's some people who go the science communication route, either YouTube videos or infographics that are accessible and really easy to understand about like, okay, hey, I just did this research study. Here are my findings, and this is what it means in like real applicable ways. So I've seen
Right.
that. Um, I've also seen people, have like town hall meetings with participants. So they've either, maybe collected participants' information with permission, or they just say like, hey, this is a time where you can ask Q&A about my research, how we can apply it to. There are other researchers who I know who've been taking their research, package it up, and again, an easy to understand way, and sent it out to LGBTQ plus
Mm.
organizations or community centers, and just like, hey, this is what I found. Um, this is what the research has been telling us. This is why I think this is important. And as a next step beyond the research, I want to work with you, partner with you to create some sort of program or some actionable thing that we can do with the research. So it's not just stopping at the here's my research, here's what it says, but then putting it into action. So
Absolutely.
um,
Well, and I was going to say that applied research is so important because it's also, I think, based on what you've said, it's also making sure that people have the resources to tell their story. And are there campaigns that you've seen before that you think that they've done a really good job of that?
um, oh my gosh, I'm thinking. Um,
Or even your own research? I mean, a lot of the things you mentioned are very smart and spot on in terms of ways that we can engage the community before, during, and after doing surveys.
yeah, so I'm kind of in the immediate, I guess you could say immediate right after with one of my recent research projects. So I've created infographics um, for a recent study on bisexual plus women of color and body
Mm.
satisfaction. So I essentially just took the main findings of that study, stuff that either was brought up in like emails or comment threads or whatever from people who were interested in the study. I made sure to like post it on all the social media pages that I initially posted the call for participants through. And I'm also trying to find time in my schedule to like make a YouTube video that goes a little bit more in depth than I could in the actual infographic. Um, and yeah, it would be great if then I could like take that and go to like I said, like an LGBTQ organization,
Yeah.
and be like, hey, here's findings, let's do something. And that's kind of what I really hope I can do with the study that I'm doing now for my dissertation, because I'm using measures that were created by other really awesome and amazing um, researchers in the bisexual plus field. But when they tested, they were testing it on predominantly white population. So I want to try to see like, okay, do I get the same results? Do I get the same findings? Is this significant? And then I think it would be really great to then go to, at the very least, other therapists, other private practice community centers that do mental health stuff and say like, okay, hey, I hopefully the findings do show that this is a helpful measure and this is how you can help your therapist understand your clients who identify as bisexual plus better. So that's one of my goals, but
I
we'll
love
just
it.
see where the data takes us.
Well, and I think it's, because you're someone who also um, does advocacy, but you do a lot of academic work in terms of research. And I know, having worked with lawmakers who could create different kinds of change based on data, oftentimes they say, well, data is definitely about the head, but there needs to be storytelling that pulls at the heartstrings, that tell the story of the data. Um, is there any data that you've collected in your research that really pulls at your heartstrings, that you're really surprised by, or stories that you feel need to be told based on the data you've collected?
Yeah, I think definitely. I would like to say that, especially with my most recent publication, um, it kind of put out the story that, like, hey, this is actually a needed area that needs to be researched more, because in all the previous or in most, I should say, in most previous research that I've been reading on bisexual plus women of color, or just bisexual plus women, it's always like, oh, it would be great if we could get like uh, more women of color. And then, you see those researchers do another study and still no women of color. And obviously they're out there, and I think that's super important. Um, but I think it also adds another layer to our understanding of bisexuality and also the LGBTQ plus community in general, because there are so many organizations, so many communities are like, hey, especially for bisexual plus people who are like, hey, if you can't find community, it means that you're just looking in the wrong place. And I'm not saying
Mhm.
that that's not true. I don't want to get into any fights with anyone, but I think that's oversimplifying things for people, especially when we know that there is racism in the LGBTQ plus community. Like, it would be great if we were, all sunshine and rainbows, like,
Mhm.
the pride flag is, but
Yeah.
that's not true. And I think, just to say, I know the previous week, it was Bisexual Visibility Week, Bisexual Pride Week, whatever you want to call it. And that was something that I just saw popping up a lot on social media from what it appeared to be. I can't say for sure who someone is, especially via a screen, but like from
Right.
what appeared to be predominantly white people. And again, you can have two things be true. Like, you can have, like, hey, there is community, and you can also have, for some reason, people of color, women of color maybe don't feel um, comfortable being part of that community. And it may not be because of the community itself. It may be because of other outside factors. So, like, one thing that I'm exploring is within group differences between racial and ethnic groups. So, like, for example, um, do people who identify as African American or Black American versus people who are also identify as Black, but maybe come from other countries, may know their family lineage, like,
Mm.
do they have the same reaction to being open and out about their bisexuality? Um, so I think there's just all these different factors that come into play, and it's more complicated
Yeah.
than we would like. But I think that's something important to be aware of, and something that just in general I'm excited to explore more.
Well, and the work you're doing is unpacking some of that complication to help people be willing to like look at it and explore it. And I just think that's absolutely what we need to be doing at this time. So I just want to say thank you for your work. And is there anything that you would want to say to viewers who are looking at this and they're trying to think about the combination of academics and activists and the research that is needed and the campaigns that are needed, especially as we think about LGBTQ people around health and well-being? Is there anything that you want to tell viewers as they start to think about this very broad subject before we leave today?
Yeah. So I think if you're someone who is maybe interested in going into research, um, don't let this idea of what a researcher looks like stop you. If we were talking in like 2016, I'd be like, Zori, a researcher who? Especially doing quantitative, like with
Ooh,
number
mm,
research, like I'm
mm.
like, you don't know me. um, but like, here I am. And I think that really comes down to having a great support system and having mentors who actually are willing to not only teach, but willing to be like, okay, this isn't working with how you're understanding it. Let me try to explain it a different way. I think so many times academics especially get so stuck in like, this is the way to teach it, this is how I was taught, this is how everyone else is taught. There's probably other ways to teach it, but like, that's not how things go. I think so many times a lot of academics get so stuck in that mindset that people from marginalized communities who may not have had that same resources, that same support group, feel intimidated, feel like, okay, this isn't for me. And I feel like we're missing so much important research, so much important knowledge, things that may be well known in those communities, like intrinsically, but because there's no data or no like correct scientific method, and yeah, then like they're looked down upon. They're like,
Mhm.
oh, that must not be real or whatever. So I would say that, and also to the people who are sponsoring and giving grants and funding for research to take a chance on beginning researchers, really implements not only that financial piece to it, but also that mentorship piece to it as well. Because again, there's a lot of great minds that are out there, but some of us are broke and some of us just may need that like support. So I would say that.
Zori, thank you so much. I so appreciate your time today. And I know that I've learned a lot from you, and will continue to. I'm excited to see your research and excited to promote it as well, especially as folks in the South and across the country utilize that to develop campaigns to hopefully better the lives of folks who are least heard from. So thank you again. And we'll have another episode later with a couple more of our panelists. But thank you, Zori, and we'll chat soon.
Thank you.